welcome to Space Store Live.
Once again, welcome to Space Store Live.
My name is Remco Timmermans. We are going to literally the middle of nowhere. We're going to southern Kazakhston.
My name is Andy Torbett. The thing I do most often is I'm a diver and an underwater explorer.
The Interplanetary Podcast, our mission is to put the ace back into space.
And tonight with us we have Nick Howes and Terry Mosley, and we're going to be talking about Mars exploration.
Last time Terry and I were together, we were in the front of a telescope.
Kids AM. Hi everyone, welcome back to Kids AM. My name is Leah, and this week we are focusing on satellite. Today we are going to be building a model of the Hubble Space Telescope. This week we are focusing on learning more about the solar system.
Hi guys, a very warm welcome. Thank you for joining us on another Thursday evening talk. And let me tell you, tonight is going to be a little bit different than the last few weeks, because we're actually taking the entrepreneurial side of the space industry. And we've actually got two space experts with us tonight. We've got Michael Loweth from Oxford Space Systems and Manny, Shar from Bryce Space and Technology. How are you guys?
Very well, thank you.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
now,
thanks.
Brilliant. A very warm welcome to all of our guests: Brian, Dan, Elizabeth, Helen, Rebecca, Sophie, and Vijay, who's actually joined us from Maharashtra in India. A very warm welcome to you. I'm not sure what time it is there, but well done for staying up that late. Michael, what are you going to be talking about today?
So I'm here because I work at an entrepreneurial SME company, so a small company, about 50 people here in the UK at Harwell, and I'm going to give that company perspective of what is it we do, how do we find that niche in space, and how do we get into space. And hopefully from the briefing overview I give you, you'll have some great questions for me and Manny.
Brilliant. Manny, what about you?
Yeah, and so I'll be complementing Michael with some kind of overall analytical data around the global space economy. What is it? How big is it? What are the recent trends? So kind of give you a quick rapid fire intro to the space economy, if you like.
Brilliant. Now, do remember, guys, that you can send us questions via the Q&A if you're here on Zoom, and we'll try our best to answer all of those in a nice informal Q&A right at the end. And if you're on YouTube, please do send your questions along in the YouTube chat below the video, and we'll try and get to those as well. Now, without further ado, Michael, I'll let you take it away, and I'm going to go off air now and see you guys in a bit. I hope you guys enjoy it.
Okay. So let me just share my screen. So hopefully that should be coming up with everyone now. Can you see that?
Brilliant.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, so as I said, my name is Michael Loweth, and I'm here from Oxford Space Systems, and we're here to talk a little bit about our journey into space, and from there you can get ideas for how you might want to be an entrepreneur and go into space yourself. Now, next slide. There we go. This will get quicker. So at the moment, we don't always realize that our world is critically dependent on space technology. We rely on it for our weather. We use it for our GPS to find out where we are. We use it all the time on our phones. We use it in our broadcasting, especially at these sort of times. We can't get out and go see, so we're so reliant on world news, seeing what's happening around the world, and all of that is really communicated through this broadcasting medium. Then we have telecommunications from explorers or military, and so there's a whole range of different areas. And one of the more newer areas of use of satellites has been the area of IoT, or Internet of Things. And this is a very big burgeoning area where you're looking at having your car talk to the garage, realize there's an update, downloading the software update, or realizing it needs to book itself in for an MOT or service and booking it in for you. And the idea of a lot of these IoT services is that it takes away that mundane planning stuff that we don't need to do ourselves and allows us to focus on more important things in our days. So space being important, how do we get that information? And what we see is satellites have in the past been massive things. They've been the size of minibuses or larger. And just like computers, they were once the size of rooms, then they fit on desktops. Now it's your phone or your watch even. That miniaturization is happening in space as well. And you see here a Surrey satellite, which is about the size of a washing machine or maybe even a microwave. And that makes them cheaper. It means you can have more of them. It makes them more versatile. But the problem exists that physics gets in the way. And a lot of these things you often need large antennas for. Now, this 3-meter antenna that's in that diagram there would fit quite happily on that large satellite on the top left corner there. But you can see on a small satellite, it just dwarfs it. It's a real challenge. How do you then fit that into a satellite? And so that's what my company does. And that is wrapping and stowing these large antennas down into a size that will fit. So this is very much our challenge. As satellites get smaller, and you see a picture of 3 GPS satellites in this case, in the top of a satellite, you only use the top part of the satellite, but in that there's not much space. So we work out how to stow these things down to be mass and volume compliant. And that brings that cost of getting things into space right down. And we do this from small antennas to large. So IoT, Internet of Things, ship identification, and Sar I talk about later on. So to give you more of a visual idea, here you see the idea, you've got the blue solar arrays, how they have to deploy out, the yellow instrument having to deploy out. And these deployments are a real challenge in space because you can't just grease or oil a hinge. In space, that sublimes away, it disappears, and you get real temperature effects. In fact, the first thing I was taught at university, do not make a mechanism for space. They really are a big challenge. And we've come along in this company to say, well, actually, we think there's a gap. Those solutions are all 40, 50 years old. we've learned a lot about space now. We've learned a lot about material science, about new ways of doing engineering and old ways. We do quite a bit using origami inspired engineering as well. And so this was a lot of why we were founded in 2013 by 3 guys, very local to the space store over at Harwell. And we've had a number of real key wins, including getting our own big facility there, and then having a few real good metrics of being the fastest growing company in the UK and winning NASA awards. So I'm just giving you a quick sort of overview insight, but I thought at this point I'd pause and give you a key term that you might need to know about, and that is new space and traditional space, or old space. New space are entrepreneurs. We tend to be venture capital backed. We're always cash and resource constrained, but we're really dynamic, and we're really able to pivot to get these new opportunities and make them work. Traditional space tends to be a lot more bureaucratic, and these are quite extreme versions of the 2 industries. And in fact, I used to be in traditional space, and that's the people that make these big satellites, work for NASA, for European Space Agency. And so we equate them to a big cruise ship. You're not one of the passengers, you're going to be working, but you know where it's going, you know when you're going to get there, and it's you know, there's a lot of momentum there. New space is much more like a wild ride. You're going to get wet, you're not quite sure where you're going to end up, but you're going to have a great fun time getting there, and you're going to be working like anything so you don't get too wet. And that's a good, you know, flippant way of just giving you an idea between the 2 terms. And OSS sees itself as a new space company, one that can work with traditional space, but normally works with new space. And in that way, first real big pivot that tripled our value was getting these 2 world records on LSAT Nano, when we got this small carbon fiber membrane that we were able to deploy out and deploy in space. Normally, traditional space would take 10 years to get that technology and prove it. We did it in about 2 years. And that gave us a very quick win of a commercial contract to do this shooting space junk. So put the target out. Yes, we'll wiggle about, but once we're deployed, we're stable, we give them a nice clear target to shoot. And that was the challenge of that activity. And you can see little baby steps, bite-sized problems building up, and using that kind of material science and kinematic understanding, we've now looked at much larger challenges like these antennas here. So this is a Sar antenna. A 60-centimeter hub here deploys out. Here we go. You might hear this, you may not. And that was a 3-meter antenna. And what that does, why do you care? I mean, it's okay, it looks like a fancy umbrella. I could use it in my garden as a sunshade, you know, especially today. But that technology can fit in a nice small satellite and can then start to give you these SAR images. They use radar as a pulse to take a picture, a bit like using a flashlight with your camera. And that means that you can take a picture day or night, good or bad weather. Suddenly, to get a picture like this on the right, you may have to wait 2 months for weather to be good and for daylight pass overhead. On the left, you can guarantee a picture every time. So that's the kind of thing that we are working on, and that by getting smaller and smaller satellites, you can end up having not just once every 2 weeks, but maybe once every day. And it's this kind of capability that the new space entrepreneurial people are really pushing, because they see a value there, and we're willing to take a risk to maybe just make sure it works by sticking into space and trying it, not taking 10 years to get new technology. But we have larger goals, and this is the kind of thing of how space companies, in my opinion, new space should be trying to work. Have bite-sized challenges know what what that challenge really is, understand it, and then build up to get to your solution. And here, these are large antennas that will go up to like 10, 15 meters. And we've got a lot of the elements there, but it takes a lot of effort, a lot of time. This was first demonstrated in about 2012. So space can take a lot of time, but there's some great people willing to put lots of good money into it, including agencies and industry. And from there, what we really see is space is an exciting place to work. It can have some really long timelines. And in this current turbulent time, I think that works for us, because a lot of our contracts are with governments. They're 2-3 year long projects, so they're not being stopped. We still have a lot of work. A lot of the commercial work is also a long term. They're looking at after the coronavirus effects. So although there's been a bit of a dip commercially, there's still lots of work there. And so it is pretty reliable work in that sense when you get in the right area of the space industry. But at that point, I'm going to leave you and hand you over to Manny and see how he takes what I've said and puts it into a financial picture. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Michael. That was incredibly interesting and great to see how much progress OSS has made, and only being formed around 6-7 years ago. I'll hand over to Manny and let's see the financial side of things.
Yep, absolutely. I'm just going to share my screen. There we go. Let me know when you can see it.
Yeah, I can see it.
Great. Yeah. Okay. Well, before I start, Michael, that was a really interesting presentation. I particularly like the cruise ship and kind of the rapids analogy there. That really rings true, I must say. So interesting presentation. All right. Well, I will just make sure we start on the first slide and make it into presentation mode. Great. So, hi everyone, my name is Manny Shar. I'm head of analytics at Bryce Space and Technology. You must be wondering maybe what is Bryce Space and Technology? Well, we're essentially an analytic consulting company. So we support organizations around both government and commercial organizations around looking at kind of the market. What is it looking like? What are the technology trends, and how the strategy and the policy and kind of supporting decision makers around those issues. And so we have extensive kind of data sets and models around the space economy, all the launches that have taken place, as well as forecasting of launches. And yeah, here's kind of a chart showing you some of the organizations that we've worked with, and also you can find a lot of our reports on our website, free to view. Lots of interesting content that you can, if you want some bedtime reading or something, I'm sure you'll find them interesting. So everything from looking at what kind of private investment is going into startup space companies. So as Michael was talking about the new space kind of trends, so we really go into some detail around what investment is going into the new space companies and how that's been evolving, who the main kind of investors are, which companies they're investing in. So those kinds of things. So I'll kind of highlight some of the data that we cover, and then yeah, you can get more detail on our website. So so what is the global space economy? Well, it's a roughly $360 billion economy, which is made up of kind of the non-satellite industry, where you have the government budgets. The government budget is predominantly made up of the U.S. government budget, so unsurprisingly, you might say. And then on the satellite industry side, it's very much a digital economy. So Michael kind of gave already made some comments on the types of space technologies around GPS and then all these different things that we use day to day, but we don't realize we're using it. So there's some interesting stats around, but by the time you're at the office, or back in normal times when we were commuting to the office, there's like a certain number of satellites that we've interacted with by the time we've gotten to the office. Satellites play a really important part in our day-to-day lives, and apart from the application side, you've also got the ground equipment, or all the GPS receivers and chipsets, and as well as satellite TV, radio, etc. So those kinds of equipment as well. So the launch side is an interesting one because it's quite although it's an essential part of it, it's not as big a market share, if you like, of the global space economy. It's about $6 billion, and then satellite manufacturing is about $20 billion market. So just to kind of note that these are very critical to the space economy, but they are less in terms of the size of the economy. And then on the reasons as to, okay, why do we care? Well, as it was alluded earlier, satellites are key to a wide range of activities. So this was kind of a study done to look at what areas, and this was focused in the US economy, what areas satellites play a key role. And from this, you can see that although it's a $360 billion economy, it actually cuts across and supports about $5 trillion of the US economy. So everything from the internet to financial services, the timing component for when you're ATMs, weather data, that's a big one, and yeah, the list goes on. So kind of a nice way to present that. And in terms of what's kind of the evolution of satellites, Michael already kind of covered this. We kind of seen a dramatic shift from humongous satellites. So you can see this big satellite in the background, which covers pretty much the whole slide. That's to scale relative to some of the other satellites. So you can see a comparison of how you have satellites like planets, which are kind of this size, and how they compare to some of the bigger satellites that are out there, like Worldview 3, which is a big kind of Earth observation satellite that images that provides imagery services. So some interesting development over the time, and we can use smaller satellites and lower costs. So I won't delve too much into this, but it kind of tracks nicely into the next slide, which is talking about the new investment that's coming into the private space industry, and that's driving this reduction in cost and kind of proliferation of increasing in capability of these systems. So you see this trend. We've been tracking this kind of private investment in startup space companies since the year 2000. And as you can tell, there wasn't much going on up until 2014. And then suddenly there was this huge influx of private capital, venture capital, and into the space sector. And the different reasons as to why that happened. And some of that is to do with companies like SpaceX, who are showing that you can make a sustainable business model from new private enterprises related to space. So investors have been keeping an eye on that, and as over the years have increasingly invested in some of these new space companies. So that's where you see that dramatic rise, and it's going to be interesting to see where we end up in 2020, but I imagine it won't be as high as 2019. Okay. Some of the other kind of work we've done recently, we looked at what causes delays in launch. So focusing on small sat launch, people might expect weather to be a big reason, but as per our analysis shows that it's that the biggest kind of chunk of the delay is to do with the primary payload and it not being ready to be launched. About 40% of that the delay is due to of the delay days are due to that. And then you have other issues around kind of the launch vehicle side, delays in that. And the launch is not an easy thing, so there's always some kind of delays that creep out the launch further out. So yeah, it's an interesting chart, which kind of is unexpected, because I personally thought weather would be a bigger factor than it is, but clearly that's where you see it's not necessarily the case. And yeah, so that will kind of give you an idea of how the launch delays are happening. And that one is also on our website if you wanted to look at it in a bit more detail. And then this slide, kind of what we wanted to talk about here is, okay, so there's a lot of this private investment going into these satellites and satellite companies and new launch vehicles. And those launch vehicles are there's about 100 plus being developed, right? Or at least on paper, with people who have announced launch vehicles, and a big part of the drive for that is the growth in the number of satellites being launched and the small sats being launched. So there's a sense that we're going to have thousands, tens of thousands of new satellites in the next years, decade, and we kind of looked at that and said, well, actually, how many of those are substantially funded, and how many of those are proposed initially or have some funding? And you can see from this chart, although the actual number of proposed satellites is sizable, when you look at the kind of the operationally and the substantially funded, it's a bit less. But then if you look at the ones that are actually substantially funded, it's a pretty small kind of fraction of the total. So it's an interesting kind of lens to look at the number of new systems planned and being developed. And this slide is kind of just giving you, this is work we did last year, looking at what are the spaceports around the world, where are they located, which ones are being under development, and which are proposed sites. So it's a fairly comprehensive view of the different launch sites, and you can see the ones being proposed in the UK. There's 7. You can kind of look at specifically where they are as well, located in the UK. And there's quite a few sites, as you can see, being developed or proposed, including suborbital, for suborbital launch and orbital launches. So a nice graphical representation. And then but kind of more looking at more recent trends, how much mass is being launched? Well, a lot of you might not be surprised. SpaceX has been launching quite a lot of their Starlink satellites. So this is part of a large constellation of satellites that SpaceX is building in-house, and they're planning to deploy a big chunk of them this year and to start partial service. So as you can see, that's being played out in them being the highest in terms of the total up mass launch. So they've got about 400 satellites, I believe, launched for their Starlink system, and those are kind of the small sat variant, but they just launched. They launch about 60 on each launch. So if they're churning out every month or so 60 satellites, you can see how that adds up to their tally. And then you also see some of the kind of launches by launch provider. So SpaceX launched 5 launches in Q1. I forgot to say this is focused on Q1 of last year, and we're looking to release these every quarter, so you'll get a quarterly update on how much launch activity is going. And then the next slide is quick representation of, okay, where were the launches taking place and kind of around the world. So the US was the lead in terms of number of launches, orbital launches in Q1. And that chart, that kind of graphic on the top left, if there was a poll I could do to guess which satellite or system was contributing the most to that communications one, it'd be good to test your knowledge on that one. But it's clearly SpaceX with their Starlink satellites, launching a considerable number of communication satellites, and the same goes for the chart on the bottom right in terms of launches by satellites by small sats by country. So yeah, this is kind of showing you what their mass class is as well. So we talk about small sats and the large satellites. You can tell they're pretty much all small sats. So again, contributing to that growth in the number of small sats being launched. And with that, I think, yeah, that covers it. So looking forward to any questions you may have. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Manny, and thank you so much, Michael. That has been extremely interesting and so informative for myself, and I hope for the audience as well. We've actually had a question. We've actually had a couple of questions come through via our YouTube link, and I guess, Manny, I think this is more for you, because we're talking about how. Well, I'll say the question. And Luke asks, how might we be making data access more affordable going forward? Because obviously we're talking about so many hundreds of satellites being launched within the next 10 years or so in the space industry. And of course, there's tons of terabytes of data that's coming down. So how is that going to be made more affordable for the industries that are looking to get access to it?
That's a good question, and there's many kind of threads to that question. So there's the element on the upstream side where you're reducing the cost of the actual spacecraft that's providing the data, right? And companies like Oxford Space Systems are contributing to the lowering cost on that front. And then in terms of the downstream, you've got developments. You've got actually programs like Sentinel where they provide their data for free, essentially, for Earth observation kind of imagery. And although the revisit rate is not as high as, say, a Planet Lab satellite, it's still data that you can then use and develop new applications for, and provide a capability for free, essentially. So a very low upfront cost in terms of entry for new startups that might be out there. We're looking to find novel ways of using imagery data, and then that there's multiple kind of approaches there. Government's playing that role, and companies are also, through innovation competition, reducing that cost per image, let's say. And then on the communication side, you've got several constellations coming up, which are trying to lower the cost of access to the internet. So it's another front that's being taken on in terms of reducing cost. So hopefully that answered the question, but there's many different kind of dynamics of answering that. So,
yeah, I mean, Michael, would you want to add anything to that?
I mean, yeah, I think Manny would give a really good answer. The first thing is there is this upstream, which means, us making things and putting them into space element of it. And there is the downstream, which is getting the data back from there. So without that actual infrastructure to start with, you're not going to be able to get the data. And it depends what kind of data you're talking about. Imagery, we're seeing a lot more of, but if you want something that is very, very recent or very targeted, it's harder to get. So it's going to be harder to, it's going to be more expensive. I think the question is probably more focused towards the sort of data transfer, the telemetry type, or telecoms type, and there, you know, there's a good availability already of that technology, but the key driver that's going to bring the cost down is actually more users. So if you can go and find a great way to use space data to say, is my house going to get flooded next week or not, or whatever the question is, and then everyone gets that and uses it, because there's so many people using that same bit of data, the cost will just go right down. And that's what we're trying to do with small satellites and launchers, get more small satellites up, so there's more satellites and it becomes cheaper to launch.
No, that's incredibly. I hope that answers your question on YouTube. I think we've touched upon it, and Manny touched upon it, about how the innovation in the space industry is kind of leading to these smaller satellites. But another question that's come through is, will we see space having a renaissance in the consumer culture? And you kind of touched upon it now, Michael, where, okay, will my house be flooded next week? It's kind of consumer behavior, isn't it? And people actually linking that within the space industry. Do you think the innovation and kind of re-establishment of the space industry in people's daily lives, is that going to make an impact on consumer culture?
Yeah, I think we are starting to see elements. There are universities or people who got lots of money who are saying they want their own satellite. There's companies who want their own networks so that they can, give particularly good IoT performance for their brand of consumer products around the world. And as that starts to filter down and becomes more capable, I've seen companies talking about technology where you can register online and then you can submit your own request for a picture to show that you're there. And yes, there won't be able to see it's you, but it will be time-stamped, it will be geolocated, it will be everything else. And when I was at this amazing thing, that was what that bit of the planet looked like. And it's those kind of ideas that's starting to get that consumerism in there. And it's what satellite applications Catapult is trying to do with a lot of its hackathons, trying to get people in to say, look, we've got the data. What do you want to do with it? How do you want to buy this? What is it you want to see? And that consumerism is something we really do want to see. Just we don't have the ideas.
And I'd just add to Michael's points there. I think it depends on how you're framing what space kind of applications are and what service and products there are. So Pokemon Go comes to mind, right? Like it's using GPS. It's kind of, and it's a consumer product, right? People pay for it, and so do you count that as part of the space economy? There's questions around that. So there's in some sense a blurring of the lines of what constitutes a space application. So in some ways that might continue right into the future as space becomes more ubiquitous. It's not necessarily going to be a distinction of that's how the space that's contributing to the space economy. So it's an interesting kind of to think about that as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your answers, and thank you for everyone who's asked questions. Please do send them through the Q&A. We'll be on for around, I think we're going to finish early tonight. We've answered everyone's questions. Anything you guys want to add, or let the everyone joining in know?
I wouldn't mind adding something to actually what Manny said, which I really liked. And one of the problems that space often has is we quite often the engineers are the back room, it's a stereotype, the back room engineers who float away, make it all work, and then someone gets to the moon and brilliant, it's great. And there's an awful lot of work that goes into that activity. So whilst it's exciting, there's a lot of work and a massive team of people that come together for each and every one of these satellites. And in very much the same way, we kind of very easily forget just how connected we are. I think I mentioned it, Manny mentioned it before, that there's, you know, I look at my smartwatch and it's now GPS linked. I can get the weather on it. It's using so much satellite data and capability. Your bank, you know, we know London to be a real hub for city banking. All of that is driven by GPS because it needs to have the very accurate timing so that everyone opens together and no one storms the marsh on it. And so we're so integrated in, but you don't normally think about it. You don't think that's where it's coming from. Oh, that program came via the satellite from UK to India. That's not what you normally think about. So very often it's actually, we need to realize how much we really do use space already in every day, every hour of our day.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I kind of add to that. It's incredible how, you know, in this situation, there's innovation going on using satellite imagery to understand how COVID is impacting different environments. So it's, you know, now that we're in this crisis, you know, it's supporting government decision makers around how do we move forward, how do we adapt, and you know, that's one of the most amazing things about it, the ability to leverage the technologies that we have for really unique situations like this that we couldn't have planned for, really. I mean, we could have planned for, but yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, and the UN has these 17 Sustainable Development Goals. They cover like everything from I recommend you look into, but space has a role to play across pretty much every one of those SDGs in some way or another. So you know, everything from elevation and topography mapping to land use, kind of oceanographic observation. So there's so many different areas that space is supporting the development of you know, global kind of development. So it's really, yeah, important.
Yeah, no, I'll actually come on to that with a question that's just been asked. But before that, Nafisa in our audience are actually asking, how did you guys get involved in the space industry?
Do you want to go first, Manny?
Yeah, sure. So I used to I came from an investment banking background, and it felt like it wasn't my passion, let's say. And I, you know, always had an interest in space ever since I was a kid. You know, I'm kind of curious about the sky and what it was about. So, you know, I've always kept that interest in space throughout, but wasn't sure what kind of careers there were, what kind of opportunities there were. But so I kind of took a bit of a leap and went to the International Space University in Strasbourg, which kind of opened my eyes to the different opportunities there are. And from there, I went to Inmarsat, which is a satellite communications company, and they provide communication services across land, sea, and air, remote areas, and those kinds of things. So I got a really good insight into a real kind of application-driven space company. So from there, I ended up at Bryce. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey, and maybe not the usual routes, I might say, but for those out there who are listening and wondering what kind of opportunities there are, so plenty of opportunities. You don't have to be an engineer, you don't have to be, there's so many different career paths that you can take. So yeah, just go for it. I think follow your passion.
Yeah. I mean, I guess with me, I sort of grew up, my dad was always into flying, so in the back and down inside aircraft and all sorts. I went and did an engineering degree like so many others. I then realized my brother, who's older than me, was working on Spitfires, rebuilding Spitfires to fly. And it's a case of any aircraft job I get will never compete with my brother working on these lovely aircraft. So I really enjoyed space modules, and I thought, all right, I'll do that. I also went to the ISU. I did an internship at NASA, and there, the one thing one of my NASA fellows, the guys there sort of taught me was, there is no one way into the space industry. You can have people who work on a production line making TVs as a electrical engineer, and they may become one of the top few of NASA. You need all kinds of different skills, and it's not just engineering, it's not just science. You know, we need everyone. So whatever your skill set is, if your passion is space, then you can come and have a job as well, I'm sure.
That's great. And then actually a very topical question on that is, what message would you give to students for entering in the field?
Do you want to go first, or shall I, Manny?
You go ahead. I'll let you go. Yeah.
Okay. So the thing that I would probably think of is entering the space industry. What you have is you have your enthusiasm, you have your drive, and so the more you can get out, the more you can look at these things, the more you can be productive and get another feather to your cap, another bit of success. And it doesn't have to be all space focused. To show you're a good manager because you've been a manager at McDonald's or Burger King or wherever, well, that shows managerial skills that you can then bring into your work. So the worst thing is to sit at home waiting for your dream job to come. Go find the jobs that give you the skills that you enjoy so that you can get the job that you want. And once you're there, your career will never be the one that you thought it was going to be, because you'll find other things you like even more. So it's a bit flexible.
That's a good way to put it. I'd just add to what Michael said, and get involved in organizations, volunteer organizations, and there's a fantastic non-profit, not-for-profit called the Space Generation Advisory Council, and they're a volunteer-led organization, about 15,000 members around the world, and they support young people, young professionals, students to get into the space industry and help them to interact with leaders in the space industry, and kind of provides that pathway towards the space industry as well. So they're always having volunteer opportunities. So try to see if there's a team that you can help join, a project group that you can join. It's your spare time, but you're also developing your skills while you're doing that. So it can be the interpersonal skills, the soft skills that aren't easy to come by sometimes. So having such an opportunity where you're doing something like that helps.
I think you've got SEDS as well, the
yes.
Students.
Yeah, that's a good one as well. SEDS, yeah.
Great. So I think anyone watching, if you just want to Google SGAC or SEDS and look into it if you're a student. I think, Vijay, I hope that answers your question. Another question which Manny, you were touching upon earlier was when you were talking about the different industries that space can play a role in. And this is an interesting one, actually. So what could be the role of space technology in the education field?
There have been quite a few thoughts and looks at how we can do this. There's often been people looking at telemedicine on, for how to do remote medicine. So you've got your surgeon expert and how do they do surgery through remotely on someone on the space station, then realizing, well, actually we could use that for large countries to reach areas that aren't near hospitals already. And from there, that same kind of technology and idea start to flow into education, and things like Zoom here. This is exactly the sort of other end where you get to, where you can start to, from a single point, broadcast out that sort of education. And space is a real good role in giving you access planet-wide, because if your satellite is in low Earth orbit and can see London, then you're going to be able to see Moscow, Washington, and wherever else you want to see in those latitudes, plus and minus. Manny, do you want to?
I'll just I think there's other ways as well in terms of like practical, hands-on experience that you can acquire. Things like launching a weather balloon kind of thing, where you get to experiment and develop technologies. And there's also build your own CubeSat things that you can understand how to develop those technologies, and then it connects you to, okay, here's a CubeSat, you're learning how to make it, and you then launch, you might be able to get to launch that at some point. But there's an element of kind of the practical and experimental side of education.
Because NASA, ESA, even the Boy Scouts have a space sort of area for education, particularly NASA and ESA. They try to have lots of material to train, from both the teachers and the students and young kids to old. So I think if you look around those sort of organizations, and I'm assuming JAXA and ISRO and other agencies around the world will have very similar. I've only got experience from ESA and NASA, and know they try to put as much out as they can, try to have lots of competitions, and if you have any real needs or ideas, you can put them forward, because they're always looking for other ways to engage and to teach.
That's absolutely great. And I think it kind of leads me nicely on to talk a little bit about Space Store and about our educational experiences with how we use kind of space data and space experiences to give a learning to all participants, I guess, across the world. So we have like different kind of experiences. We have fascination with space, and satellite space mainly, which I wanted to focus upon, was where we kind of build a real CubeSat over the course of 2 hours. So I guess there's plenty of educational kind of sorry, I think I cut off there, but I was just saying that there's so many educational factors and innovations that we can use with space data. I think we've answered everyone's question. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end. Thank you once again, Michael and Manny, for joining us on this lovely evening. Thank you once again to all our participants on Zoom and YouTube. A very quick reminder that you can always head over to our Space Store YouTube channel to rewatch any of our previous talks, and this talk will be going on there shortly after, of course. And something that's new to Space Store Live is a quiz, which is going to be happening tomorrow night in partnership with Ephemeris. So please do make sure you head over to our website and register with your family to attend the space quiz and test your space knowledge. And next week's talk, of course, at the same time, 5:30 on Thursday, we actually have British physicist and human spaceflight program manager, Libby Jackson, and she actually played a very, very important role when Tim Peake went up into space a few years ago. So I hope you guys all tune in. Remember, you can register for it via our website or Facebook page. And once again, a big thank you to Michael and Manny for joining us and giving such an incredible talk. And thank you once again to everyone who's listened in. I hope you guys have a great weekend and a great evening. Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Right, bye.
See you guys tomorrow, and I'll speak. All right, then. Bye.
Welcome to Space Store Live.
Once again, welcome to Space Store Live.
My name is Remco Timmermans. We are going to literally the middle of nowhere. We're going to southern Kazakhstan.
My name is Andy Torbett. The thing I do most often is I'm a diver and an underwater explorer.
The Interplanetary Podcast, our mission is to put the ace back into space.
And tonight with us we have Nick Howes and Terry Mosley, and we're going to be talking about Mars exploration.
Last time Terry and I were together, we were in the front of a telescope.
Kids AM. Hi everyone, welcome back to Kids AM. My name is Leah, and this week we are focusing on satellite. Today we are going to be building a model of the Hubble Space Telescope. This week we are focusing on learning more about the solar system.